Welcome to The Next Step, a cardboard reality podcast about games above and below today's game of the day. The game of the day this week is Scythe. Enjoy the show. What's going on, guys? And what's going on, Scott? How you doing?
I'm glad to be here, Dylan.
And we're happy to come to you with the pilot episode of my show, The Next Step.
The Next Step.
It just came up with the title. It's great. I had a bunch of stand-in titles, and then we're like, well, we'll just settle on this one. It's fine enough. So hope you guys like the title. Basis of the show, everyone else is kind of have like a theme. Mine is kind of a extension of a discussion topic we had a few months ago where we looked at, actually that was like a year ago.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Because that was before I played Tigris and Euphrates. Think about that.
Oh, man.
So this is a progression show where we look at a game of the day, and we look at that game, we talk about it, why the fans like it, why the people like it, like the masses of Board Game Geek, why we personally like it, or what we like about the game. Mm-hmm. Then we look at games below it, and we look at games above it. So in complexity and in rules, we look at time length as well, maybe a factor in that. So a lot of factors in it. This is kind of like a recommend the listeners or recommend fans of this games that are lighter or heavier than it. So something I like doing. I like recommending games to people. So it just only made sense for me to have a show like this.
That's true. You're always linking recommendations for everybody in Slack.
Literally everyone. So also plug for our Slack.
Yes, join our Slack.
Yeah. Find out about that on Patreon.
Yes. We have a Patreon. The link is probably below the video.
Probably in the description, so check that out. But as you can clearly see in the title of this video, the game of the day for my first episode is Scythe.
Yes.
This is a engine building alternate history 1920s game, like set in the 1920s. Didn't come out in the 1920s.
No.
It's done by Jamie Stegmaier of Stonemaier Games. This is a quite popular game.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, it has 3 expansions.
So
Invaders from Afar,
The Wind's Gambit,
and Rise of Fenris.
Yes.
And then some of the small things like the component upgrades and things like that, and like the extra board.
Right.
It's an engine building game with really nice components. It was a game that Stegmaier designed from the ground up to match the art that was already floating around.
Yeah. Jacob Brzezowski, I think.
I think so, yeah. And it's kind of like a big hybrid game.
Yeah, I would say that.
It's mainly focused on the Euro aspects, the engine building, the gathering of resources, upgrading through your player boards. But then there's also some combat. There's some encounters that you can also, like, a little bit of like a choose your own adventure style where you get like 3 choices of things you can do.
Right, yeah. Like as you're going around on the board with your hero, there are cases where you'll draw a card and it's like, oh, here's a little pick your thing. Do you want to feed the geese to your bear, or do you want to feed the geese?
Feed the geese like some bread.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of things that people like. People like the components. I mean, like that's people like bling.
Yeah, and people do like bling.
And this is a game that comes as blinged out as you can get for the most part.
No, yeah, everything in the game is well made. The board is sturdy. The box is good. Art is good.
Indented player boards.
It's got the indented player boards.
Art on the player boards.
Yep. Good art. Art was one of the main selling points for a lot of people, I think.
Really nice minis that are all different for each player.
Mm-hmm.
You have the hero minis as well that have like the animal.
Right. Like there's the Polska faction, which has the bear, or the Crimean faction with the eagle. They all have something.
Right. Yeah. People, what do you personally like about this game, Scott? Since it's one that was in your top 30.
Yeah. So I like the way that it kind of blends these different things together. I think that the engine building, like upgrading your player board by moving these cubes around, I thought that was a satisfying like arc of the game as you're building this up.
Mm-hmm.
And then also on top of that, like you're collecting resources that are on the board and you're trying to lock down these areas to defend these resources, and you can like move them around, like having your workers carry them off. And like you're fighting, usually if you're in a fight with someone, if it's not for like one of your stars for victory, it's because you're trying to steal resources from them by chasing their workers away.
Or sometimes over the factory in the middle of the board.
Right.
Sometimes
so that way you can get like a special action card
Right.
that lets you take more powerful actions.
Right.
And I think I like the way that it blends the Euro mechanics with the conflict, in that you're fighting over the resources for your engine building.
Right. I think that one thing that I personally like is the progression.
Mm-hmm.
You, with most engine building games, you want to start off with nothing and end up with a lot.
Yeah.
In this one, their mechs upgrade. You've got more efficient actions that you're going to be taking.
Mm-hmm.
You can build buildings out on the boards like tunnels and windmills. And even from the get-go, your player boards offer asymmetry.
Right. There's a unique combination. Like there's a player board and a faction board that combine. So like as a faction, say like you're playing as Rus, the Russians basically, you have special abilities in that are tied to that faction. Like you can take the same action more than once in a row because you're the Russians. But the actual like player board that goes with that can be different. And so you may get one that is more geared towards a certain type of gameplay.
Mm-hmm. Which is quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a common thing in games, I find. Like a lot of times you get a player board and you're like, oh, they're kind of tied to a certain like strategy.
Right. Like asymmetric player boards that are not tied to the faction specifically that's not something that you see that often.
Right. So, yeah, I think do you think that's the gist of what people like about this game?
I think so. I think we covered it pretty well.
Yeah. So kind of the gist of this is we want to look at, for those people who do like Scythe or want to go up to Scythe, they may be a little bit newer to the hobby, and sometimes it's intimidating to take that step. Even though Scythe isn't necessarily a heavy game, it's like a 3.2, 3.3 on BGG, if I'm thinking correctly. It's not a super like difficult game to play.
Right.
But some people are just getting into the hobby and they want to find something that they may be ready to play.
I was actually a little surprised when I saw how heavy it was rated on BGG.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a 3.37.
Right.
Which, to me, I thought Scythe is very straightforward once you know what the rules are.
Right. Yeah, it can be, but like you also think about like combat you have to teach, but it's not a frequent thing. So sometimes, so there might be a lot of like rules overhead at the beginning.
I guess. I feel like, in general, once you know the basic mechanics of the game, I feel like it's very easy to grasp what things do on the board.
Right.
And I think that's one of its strengths.
I think sometimes for a like first-time gamer, the amount of rules can intimidate someone up front.
Yeah, and I can see that.
Yep. So we wanted to start this by looking at games, below it in weight. Scott has possibly 2 games?
Yeah, so one of them is kind of cheating, but we'll see about that.
Okay, and then, I know exactly the game,
Yeah.
and I have 2 games for it as well. We'll start with Scott, though.
Okay, well, we'll start off with the one that's cheating.
Of course, and
Yeah.
I know exactly what this is.
All right, yeah, it's My Little Scythe.
Yeah. This was a print-and-play game from a couple years ago that a daughter and her dad designed, and
Yes.
it was using My Little Pony miniatures, like toys.
Yeah.
And they instead, like, it was taken off BGG. We thought, oh, it got a cease and desist. And in reality, Stegmeyer got the game designed on his own publishing company, but with a generic animal theme.
Right. It's just a bunch of like little critters. And actually, I think it might be based around the animal companions because I know there's like a tiger,
Okay.
like the Siberian tiger that's with the Rus faction.
Oh, yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. And in that case, it's, I believe, for combat, you're throwing pies. But the basics of the game are still there. It's just in a very slimmed down fashion. And you could probably play this with like an 8 or 9 year old.
It's considered a family weight game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, if you're family weight is or family games are a very like hard to define like term, but I think it's like
usually I take it as it's a lightweight game that adults can play too.
Right. Yep, adults and kids.
Yeah.
So it's like not a kid's game necessarily, but it's like of enough complexity that a kid and adult can both enjoy it.
Right.
Think that's a good pick?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think so. Mine, I took it in a very different approach because Scythe is a hybrid game. I looked at the Euro take and the quote unquote Ameritrash take. When we were thinking about the Ameritrash side, I think of something with big minis or a lot of miniatures. I think of something with combat. And how about a game with the exact same combat? How about Blood Rage?
Okay.
I think Blood Rage introduces like area control, which you're in kind of like moving about a board. It's the use of like cards, similar to how you do combat with Scythe.
Right. Like with Scythe, it's you can contribute a combat card and then also your dial at a certain number.
Right.
Blood Rage, it's you draft the cards and then everybody submits one card face down.
Right. And the drafting is what you do at the beginning of every round. So you're kind of like eyeing that you're taking combat cards.
Right.
So it's one of those where you can kind of like, it's similar to Scythe, you can morph your strategy around like how you want to play.
Right, and you can get some upgrades and stuff for your clan to take in a certain direction for a particular strategy.
But it is definitely a more combat-driven game than Scythe.
Yeah, everything in this game is about winning combat or losing combat if you go for that strategy.
Yeah, shout out to Loki.
Yeah, but in general, combat is everything that this game is about. So if you like area control and you liked Scythe, but you want something a little bit lighter and easier to introduce people to, I think Blood Rage is a good pick.
Right. Did you say you had another lightweight pick?
Yeah.
Or lighter pick?
Yeah, another lighter pick. I think Comet could be a good one.
Yeah, good one.
This one has you with your own player board doing action selection with limitations, sort of like how Scythe does it. Like you're not adapting your player board like in Scythe, but you are taking action selection off a player board with certain limitations, like how many actions you can take of a certain type per round. Mm-hmm. And it also has deterministic combat like Scythe, where it's both players show a card, and then based on like how many forces they have and the card, then you just count up and see who wins.
It does also introduce a little bit of engine building because of the tech tiles.
Yes, the tiles that you're buying to upgrade yourself, and like you're getting more powerful, and you're like sort of building an engine. Like there are some, like I believe the white tiles can help you accrue certain like resources better.
They're kind of like an economy track, whereas blue is defensive and red is aggressive.
Right.
You're also going to be very, we kind of mentioned the miniatures because, who doesn't like a miniatures game if you're looking for combat?
Right. Like if you're looking for combat and area control, usually miniatures are in the picture. This one has some more like old-fashioned type of miniatures. They're not the resin, they're plastic, but they still look pretty nice.
They're smaller, but there's a good variety of them. You have like mummies, you have the scorpion.
Right, a scorpion, a war elephant, and a mummy. Let's see. I don't know what the other ones are, actually.
Is there a pharaoh?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, this is kind of... We didn't even mention the theme. This is like Egyptian mythology.
Yes.
So you're going to be... It's a cool game.
Right.
And I think this is a great pick.
And yeah, it's a game that rewards aggression much more than Scythe. But at the same time, you're also fighting over these points, similar to how like you might be fighting over the factory or tunnels, for certain resources that you need. It's over key points, not just over who has the most areas.
Right. you mentioned key points, and my other light game is one that is all about non-confrontationally controlling points. Mine is the Spiel des Jahres winner from the 90s, Tikal.
Okay.
It's all about it's hex driven. It's got a little bit of exploration, kind of like not as thematic as you'd see in Scythe, but you're turning over these tiles and you're like, oh yeah, I found South American ruins. Right. That's the exploration. But it's all about moving your explorers around and controlling these temples that you're either like, you're digging more and you're like, oh, these temples get more levels. I move them through the jungle. I am trying to collect these masks. So it's a very Euro take on moving around a hex board, but it is very focused on like area control, as opposed to where Scythe is a lot of using the tile or using the hexes themselves for the resources. So it's a different look. It's much lighter. There's less to manage. But I still think it's a good step below if you're looking for more the Euro side of Scythe, where instead of the confrontation parts of Scythe that we've mentioned.
Right. And that is one of the difficulties in recommending a game based on Scythe is like, well, which parts of it do they like the most?
Right. And that's something that if you're watching this, you really have to think about what you like about Scythe. Scythe is many parts of board gaming. It's not just the combat or the Euro aspects. It's a lot.
Right.
So we've got 2 games to both recommend on the heavier side. If you've played Scythe and you're like, oh yeah, I think Scythe is really cool, but I want something maybe longer, maybe more complex, maybe something with a little more depth. These are some games that we're going to recommend on that end of the spectrum.
Right. So I guess I'll go first on this one. So this one is only a little bit heavier, I think.
Okay.
But this is Eclipse.
Ah, yeah. One that I haven't played.
Yes. So this is a 4X game. So if you liked the, finding the random events from Scythe, that's something that is going to be much more fleshed out here. You are building up like an economic engine to fuel your expansion and your combat to build more fleets. So you've got, economic aspects. You are getting technologies to upgrade yourself, and you're also fighting and exploring. So it's got a lot going on in it. It fleshes out the exploration more than Scythe does, because it has the, you're adding these tiles out as you explore them.
Right.
And there's a lot more conflict between players. So if you played Scythe and you're like, man, I wish I could just beat up people more, then Eclipse would be a good one.
Right.
If you don't like people messing with you, though, I would say this is not necessarily where you want to go up from Scythe.
Right. I'll also look at my conflict-heavy approach. I picked a conflict-heavy Ameritrash game, and I picked a low-conflict Euro game for this side of the spectrum as well. And I'm going to need a little bit of help on this one from Scott. Because this is one of his favorite games. I picked Forbidden Stars.
Ooh.
Forbidden Stars is out of print, but I do find it fairly easy to find. A lot of board game stores still carry it because it's sometimes hard for a friendly local game store to sell a $100 game.
Yeah, it can be.
And it's also going to be back in print here soon from PSC Games.
Right, with a different theme, correct?
With a different theme, yeah. With a steampunk theme, if I'm thinking correctly.
Yeah. It's going to be a steampunk theme. I believe the way of doing the order tokens will be gone.
Yeah. I picked this one because it's got in-depth combat. It has a little bit of the moving around and taking advantage of resources on planets. And it has asymmetrical abilities because it has 4 different, variable. It's not asymmetrical, I would say. It's more variable player powers.
Right. Everybody has access to different combat cards. I guess I could say that it's asymmetric. Because the basic infantry for the Eldar are different than the basic infantry for the Orcs. They have different stats.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, so in this one, it's 40K, Warhammer 40K universe. There's 4 factions. There's the Chaos Space Marines, which I believe is the World Eaters, is the specific band of them. There's the Ultramarines, the Eldar, and the
Orc boys.
And the Orc Boys with the Z.
Gotta drive them cars.
Yeah, they just want to drive fast. They want to find places where they can race their cars. That's why they're conquering these planets.
Exactly. Such a great theme. It's such a great faction.
Yeah. So each of them have different units. They have different like combat cards that they can acquire, as well as different I forget what they're called. There's like these special like tactics card that you can get,
right?
Which you can also use for special things. And then in combat, based on your units, you're rolling some dice, which are going to give you like either hits, defends, or morale. And then you're going to use your combat cards over 3 rounds to modify your die rolls and give you bonuses to try to either destroy the enemy or to have more morale than them at the end of the 3 rounds.
It's kind of like its own little mini game that you're playing for the combat, which is, in my opinion, a much more satisfying thing than just like playing a card.
Right. I would recommend playing it 2 players, at least until you're both very comfortable with the rules.
Yeah.
Because it can go long at 4, or like 3 or 4, and usually there's people who are going to not be in combat watching other people who are in combat.
I agree.
So unless you are confident that you can take your turns quickly and resolve combat like without having to sit and wait, like try to figure out what you want to do, then I would recommend sticking at 2.
I can agree with that. So thank you for tag teaming that one with me.
You're welcome.
Your other pick for a heavy next step.
Right. So if you don't like it when people mess with you, I would suggest Terra Mystica as a step up from Scythe.
That's a good pick, obviously.
Yes.
Hence the guy who has Gaia Project as his number 1 game.
Yeah. Obviously, Dylan is a fan of Terra Mystica.
Mm-hmm.
With this one, you're playing as these different fantasy races, which each have a little something special about them. And you are sort of like in Scythe, you have these things that you're taking off of your player board to like, build up your towns and create sort of an engine. But basically, like whenever you're putting out these buildings, you're uncovering these spots that tell you exactly what you're getting from that.
Yeah, it's an engine builder.
Yeah. It's very clear. I think even though Terra Mystica is heavy, like once you know the game, I feel like it has very little overhead.
Yeah, I agree.
Same thing with Gaia Project, where like when you look at the player board, you can kind of just tell, like, oh, I put this building out, and because I revealed that spot, it tells me exactly what I'm going to be getting from that.
Yeah.
And I think that's something sort of like what Scythe was trying to get with its player boards.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think if you liked the engine buildingness and you liked the different variable factions, then I think that this is a good heavier step from that.
Yeah, I agree. I just realized that I'm recommending 2 out-of-print games for the heavyweighter. But this one is also coming back into print this year. This is one I played recently, and I made the direct connection to it in the middle of the rules teach. This is Roads and Boats by Splotter. We just recently talked about this one. The thing that was able to connect to this one was the resources laying on the board. And I was like, oh, this is just like Scythe. And then I was like, yeah, it kind of is, because while in Scythe you have those resources on the board and other people can like come in and take them, this is one of those situations where you're actually having to move them around to be able to like, oh, I need these 2 boards in a certain hex. And then once I move them there, then I can use those boards to build a building in that hex.
Right.
So it's not just the resources being around, it's also the logistics of moving them to where you need them to. You're building roads out with a dry erase board, you put a piece of plexiglass over these hexes, and you're drawing out the roads to make it to where like your transporters can move the goods around your hexes.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is resource conversion. So you're going to start off with 3 donkeys, 2 geese, some wood, and some stone. And by the end of it, you're making stock certificates. You're building oil rigs. And if you play with the expansion, you're going to build a plane. So like, it's kind of this like grandiose start from nothing and have the world in your hand by the end. But it is really cool because it is as mean or as nice as you want it. It has multiple scenarios, so you don't have to always like play with a static board that Scythe has. It you can build up walls to where no one can steal your resources if you want to play it the safe route. If you see that you want to kind of like play a cooperation game, like where you're kind of working together, but you're still competing. You can build share factories. You can share some resources. You can really do it that way, but then in the end, you're still competing to win.
Right.
And the scenarios make it to where for different layouts of the board. So if you want something really conflict heavy, you can have everyone start on top of each other. So I think there's a lot of depth to it, a lot of options, and I really don't think it's that hard. If you understand this building gets me resources, and I need these resources to do this, kind of like you need in Scythe, kind of like Terra Mystica as well, then you're going to understand this game. It's intimidating because the box is, has a reputation for being called a coffin-sized box. It's huge. But the new box is supposed to be smaller. It's the 20th anniversary reprint, and I think it's one that people should be able to get their hands on. So that's my recommendation, Roads and Boats by Splatterspellin.
All right.
So thanks for tuning in. This was the first episode of The Next Step. I'm unsure what we're going to be looking at next time. Feel free. I'm always looking for recommendations. They do need to be games that I've played. So if you either at me on Twitter at Saint_56, or if you do it to Cardboard Reality, which is Cardboard Realit, without the Y on Twitter. If you mention either of us, you should be able to get in contact with us, or maybe even message me on BGG at OMD56. If you do any of those things, then I should be able to find a recommendation for you. If I've played it, we can kind of be in talks, because I'm always looking for content for this. A lot of this is going to be games that we've played or the popular games in the masses. So I want to also be open to feedback from you guys, and open to be able to help you guys out to find games that are lighter, that give you the same feel, but maybe lighter to introduce to your families, or your gaming group is that game's a little light. Well, let's crank it up to 10. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm Dylan.
I'm Scott.
And this was the first episode of The Next Step.
Bye, guys.
See you later.